When you see a tag team like the Motor City Machine Guns, it's easy to take for granted all their skills in wrestling are probably what they've spent their lives on, and it's likely it's all there is to these two men. After all, to become as good as they are in the ring takes a lot of work and time to hone that kind of ability in the ring. Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley began teaming and quickly became champions for Pro Wrestling 01, and even held the IWGP Junior Tag Team Championships. Their international accolades were just the cherry on top, as they are considered legends of TNA or Impact, as they have been there since the place basically started, and both have held every major championship in the promotion. But there's a lot more to this tag team. Starting in 2008, the two would form a band with friends Adam Tatro, Chris Plum, and fellow TNA wrestling star Petey Williams. Petey is one of the more underrated wrestlers, but he's most known for popularizing and inventing the Canadian Destroyer. Petey's run as being the miniature Scott Steiner is probably another thing he's known for. However, what is probably not expected of the former X Division champion is that he's played instruments for decades. The band would name themselves after a book about an alien spaceship landing during the Crusades and being stormed by knights. During an interview with Slam Wrestling, the bandmates would say, the band was heavily inspired by classic rock like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, but also had a lot of punk influence like Iggy Pop and the Stooges. The band's sound is distinct, and one that unexpectedly sounds nothing like a band comprised of pro wrestlers and reminds you more of the early 2000s revival garage punk.
People reviewed our album, and I've heard people say they're kind of like, rock, but then this song sounds like grunge, this one sounds like punk, this one sounds like, Rage Against the Machine, this one sounds like Stone Temple Pilots. The best way I can put it, we're kind of like a garage rock type band. Garage rock. I mean, it's a lot different than if you think of wrestlers that do band, you think of Macho Man's rap album and John Cena and Chris Jericho and stuff like that. Honestly, if we weren't wrestlers and you didn't know we were wrestlers and you're listening to this music, you'd actually like the music. Just because we were all musicians prior to being wrestlers. It wasn't like we're wrestlers, let's be musicians now. No, it wasn't like that. I've been playing guitar for longer than I've been wrestling. So
you realize there is a stigma.
Oh yeah, that's why. I mean, but you know what? A lot of the people that already bought the album are wrestling fans. Yeah, I know there's a stigma to it, they're wrestlers, but you're gonna be surprised.
I've been telling people on this channel to subscribe, and they won't.
Yes?
What can we do about that? Can you help me out? Maybe if you tell them to subscribe, they'll do it.
Threaten it. I'll threaten it for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. You don't have to do it or you're cursed.
What makes a good musical artist? Well, what makes a good musical artist is something that makes a good pro wrestler. It makes a good entertainer of any kind. It's about that connection with the people, that positive energy you can translate to the crowd, and whether they're having a good time and you're having a good time, everyone's happy, and that's what it's all about.
But the point is that you can't tell somebody what to like, and really, I personally think that a good band covers a lot of ground. They're varied and they're original,
It's all about the music. Led Zeppelin. There's something about a live Led Zeppelin performance that just captivates you while you watch it, especially if you appreciate musical talent and if you ever play guitar or played a musical instrument yourself, you can appreciate the kind of work and the kind of creativeness that goes into what they do, just like the creativeness that you see in the ring each and every week from the Motor City Machine.
or the creativeness in our own band, the High Crusade. I mean, cheap plug, but while we're here, why not?
Why not?
Our album's coming out in a couple months, so feel free to buy it.
As the band was beginning to form and take shape, others like Mickie James and Maria Kanellis were given what seemed to be like punishments for branching out on their own in the WWE. But Alex Shelley said it was the complete opposite in TNA at the time, and that both he and Sabin felt encouraged by TNA to pursue the band, with Dixie Carter being someone with a history in promoting musical acts. This seems why she would be more open to the idea than others, and Shelley would even breach the topic during the previously mentioned Slam Wrestling interview. Alex Shelley gave Dixie a little credit by saying, "We've spoken to her about it in passing, albeit briefly. She's obviously a busy lady, but she's always willing to talk to us, which is comforting and pretty awesome." When asked if their future was in wrestling or music back then, they all had different but similar answers to the question. Alex Shelley would say, "As far as it takes us, and both. I want to wrestle the first match of a TNA house show at an arena in Dallas, and then have to hurry across town to open for the Black Keys at the House of Blues. It'll be great." Chris Sabin went on to say, "Music along with wrestling are two things that I have enjoyed and have inspired me. I love both, and I love participating in both. I'm along for the ride, wherever the path may lead." Petey Williams would say, "Why can't we do both? I know that I would really enjoy a future in music. I just don't want to be typecast as a bunch of wrestlers trying to do music. I was playing guitar and performing in a band long before I was a wrestler. I believe that if you handed somebody our new CD, that they would love it, regardless if we are wrestlers or not." The High Crusade have been a pretty big part of the guy's life since its inception, and has even helped break the ice with other wrestlers who are interested in music. During Kazuchika Okada's time in TNA, it could be said that he was not used in the best way and having trouble fitting in. The Young Bucks and the Motor City Machine Guns embraced Okada, and the Machine Guns specifically bonded with Okada over his lesser-known talent. It turned out the Rainmaker was also a riff maker, and he would go on to play guest guitar on a High Crusade album. Just one more accolade in a very long list for Okada, but quite a feather in the cap of the High Crusade to get the biggest wrestling star in Japan in the band.
さあ、そして今回一つ音楽バンドということでご紹介いただきたいんですが、まずはちょっといきなりですけれど、こちらの、さあ、こちらの CD が欲しいという方はどうしたらいいでしょうか。これかっこいいですね。
これが CD ジャケットなんですけれども、
はい、
で今下に出てますね、
はい、
ここの、アドレスまで問い合わせてください、そうすれば直接ハイクルセイドにつながります、はい、もちろん英語ですので。
そうですね、はい、サスケバンドとね対決してほしいですよね、
ね、やってもらいたいですね、夢の共演ね、やってもらいたいですね、
はい、今回このエンディングテーマも、このハイクルセイダーズの、
これからですね、ワールドアリー
The High Crusade have released two albums, one in 2010 called It's Not What You Think, and another in 2020 called Main Statement. The debut, It's Not What You Think, was a high-energy offering that sounds like a band that every band in college movies are trying to sound like. The album runs a bit over a half hour, and it's one that I have no problem throwing in for a drive. But a lot happened between this album's release and the release of the second album. TNA had gone through many changes, including the loss of some of the band members, including Shelley. The tag team had all but dissolved due to the injuries, refusing to allow their schedules to line up on all but a few independent dates, and Alex Shelley was basically thinking about retirement and just training others. Petey Williams was more or less in the same boat and rarely getting anywhere near a wrestling ring at this point. When 2020 rolled around, the world was in a different place, and things were so far from the norm, it's hard to even think about that today. It would be during this time that the High Crusade would make its return. The release, Main Statement, was the offering, and it was the catalyst for the band members to push themselves as hard as they ever had, one more time in the studio. And as it turned out, in the ring as well. This album would also be the one to feature guest guitars from Kazuchika Okada. The album released right as the Machine Guns began to make a career resurgence. After years of injuries making it impossible for them to team as timing never matched up, things finally began to get back on track as the 2020s started, and both men would see success not only in their tag team endeavors, but this would be when Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin truly got the respect they had earned all their years in wrestling. Shelley was given a great run at the top of the card in the World Championship scene by defeating everyone from Nick Aldis to Hiroshi Tanahashi. And Chris Sabin would set records with his recapturing of the X Division Championship. During this time, even Okada was enjoying the fame brought by his bouts with Kenny Omega and having a great start to the decade. The odd man out of the group is really Petey. Petey would make a comeback run in Impact and would do well, but he didn't quite get the same reception as the Machine Guns and didn't see much of a resurgence. And that's a shame. Petey is one of the more talented guys you're going to see in the ring, and he never got as much respect as he probably should have. If this video inspires you to do anything, I would hope it would be to throw on a High Crusade song and see if it's for you, and why not throw on some Petey Williams matches while you're at it as well. The guy was so underrated, and with all the destroyers you see today, isn't it worth seeing the original? It's safe to say the Machine Guns would go down as one of the greatest tag teams of all time, but hopefully this video will go a little way to make sure that the High Crusade doesn't become a forgotten footnote of such a great group of wrestlers and musicians.
I don't know if you've seen this very recently. They must have done this in '79, but somehow it's not been seen for 30 years. And I just saw it about 10 days ago myself. It's on the internet now. It's a segment with all 5 of those guys, with Bob Roop, Ronnie Garvin, Bob Orton Jr., Boris Malenko, and Ron Wright. The 5 guys that were part of my crew that wanted to try to take the territory. And after they couldn't take the territory, they did an interview in which they just basically said, here's the business. It's all bullshit, you know? I mean, I've never seen anything as bad as this thing.
Match introducing from Sarasota, Florida at 235 pounds, the international champion, the Macho Man Randy Savage.
In 1979, wrestling was as hot as it had ever been, and this rang true in the southern United States more than anywhere, with wrestling promotions and stars within driving distance on almost every night of the week. It was hard to find someone who wasn't invested in pro wrestling at the time. Knoxville, Tennessee was no exception to this, and may have actually been quite the wrestling hub at this particular time. To begin with, the people were treated to the offerings of Southeastern pro wrestling, but after an exodus of 5 top stars, the fans now had 2 competing promotions in Knoxville. The back and forth was not restricted to the ring, however, as things spilled out in conflicts between the companies in public, and even in restraining orders issued against the promotions. During this time, on a late night at the arena, the men of All Star Wrestling formed a plan of mutually assured destruction with their rivals. If things did not go well for All Star Wrestling, the plan was to stand before a camera and give out every secret of the wrestling business before sending it to the local TV stations.
Myself, Ronnie Garvin, Larry Simon or Boris Malenko, Bob Orton Jr.,
and Ron Wright.
Ron Wright, yeah. Well, again, we had tried to do a hostile takeover, and was the idea of starting a union and having a unionizing pro wrestling. And one of the people who had been in our group, Chicken, I don't know what he did, I use the term stooged us off. He went and exposed what we were doing. And the idea of the wrestlers unionizing scared the promoters so bad that Eddie Graham in Florida, even though he was kind of far removed from us, but Barnett in Atlanta, Jim Crockett on our northeast side, and I think it was Jarrett. I'm not sure who it was in Tennessee on our west side. They all collaborated. When we would be doing a show in Knoxville or any big show we had, they would always run an opposition. They'd have 18 guys on a card, Andre the Giant, the world champion, the NWA champion, or whatever, and they always had these loaded cards, and so we couldn't compete with them. And we were looking for a way to try to, keep our efforts. We put everything into it. We knew that we were going to be persona non grata in the business for a while if we failed, but we tried. And so we came up with the idea. It wasn't my idea. It might even been Ron Wright's. I don't remember exactly, but the idea was that we were going to try to show these promoters that were ganging up against us, we were going to try to show that we could hurt them. And at that time, it was 10 years earlier than when the WWE had that special where they told everybody that wrestling is sports entertainment rather than a real sport. So, but in the late '80s, it was still kayfabe. I mean, there were guys that were, they were keeping it from their own families that we were working.
This was long before the 2020 special that Eddie Mansfield and John Stossel produced. This would have been a massive deal and changed the entire course of pro wrestling had it been seen.
If we hadn't been compromised by someone, turning spy or, turn traitor on us, we had a chance. But once they were, I'm telling you, the idea that we were going to unionize scared the crap out of them. And so that was basically what it was about. And I mean, a lot more, we made allusions to things like, again, more just plan B, C, D, and F or whatever that has conjecture out there that there may be more of this kind of thing. But this was a one-trick pony. That's the only one we did. And again, if you'll notice, we never knocked the fans. We never knocked, you people are stupid for watching wrestling or anything like that, because we never felt that way. The spectators, the people who came to the matches, are the one that paid our bills. But my disappointment has always been with the promoters and the wrestlers themselves, the guys who would not stand up for themselves, would not stand up for the business, that got out and made interviews about how they were going to, and in real life that they were, that guy's a shit or he's tough or whatever, and wouldn't stand up for themselves. They get, complain in the cars up and down the road, we got cheated in our payoff again, and just take it. Not fight, not quit and protest that you quit and say, well, if you're not going to pay me the way you should, I'm going to quit.
This tape and the contents of it were given the name of Plan B.
Hello, my name is Bob Roop, and my function here today is to introduce a documentation that I'm calling, and the people associated with me are calling Plan B.
The tape begins with Bob Roop on camera. He introduces himself and within moments calls the recording Plan B, and says his purpose is to let you know that pro wrestling is not real and explain the roles he has had in wrestling.
And there's a lot of people out there that might recognize me, and those people would be called wrestling fans. The greatest majority of you won't recognize me because you're not wrestling fans. In truth, my occupation is that of a professional wrestler. My purpose here today is to tell you about professional wrestling. Not what you're used to seeing. Not the burlesque sort of carnival sideshow type wrestling show that you're used to seeing, but what wrestling, professional wrestling, in actuality really is. I think in order that I should start by giving you some of my personal background so you have an idea of my information and where I'm coming from and the things that I tell you. In 1968, I was on the United States Olympic team that went to Mexico City. I was a Greco-Roman heavyweight wrestler. After competing in the Olympics, I returned to the college I'd been going to, Southern Illinois, and graduated a year later with a liberal arts degree. I've been offered a variety of jobs, teaching, coaching, working for the government, but none of them matched the money first, and in a way the mystique that professional wrestling had to offer. Now, I'd always heard that professional wrestling was fake. We've all heard that. But I didn't know. And it is a very closed society. I found that out right away. Well, I've been in wrestling 10 years now. In those 10 years, I've gone from one being awed by that mystique and being taken in by it. I've gone from one being, in a sense, grateful to be a member of a secret club, a closed fraternity, you might say, and that's what professional wrestling is. I've been a preliminary wrestler, I've been a main event wrestler, I've been a booker. And a quick definition, a booker is a man that works in a particular wrestling area, that arranges all the matches, he directs the television show to create that certain effect that will try to draw people into the wrestling arenas to see those matches. He secures different wrestling talents, exchanges talents. He handles the day-to-day operation of the actual promotion. He's the director. He's called a booker in wrestling vernacular. I've been a booker, and again, a director. And then I've moved up to the final step in wrestling promotion, that of a promoter. I've been a promoter. I've actually promoted wrestling matches. I've promoted myself in wrestling matches, and naturally I couldn't let anybody know that I was promoting myself because there would seem to be collusion. So let's go back over that again briefly. The Olympics, college degree, the entire spectrum of experience in the wrestling business. And I've been in it 10 years now, professional wrestling. And it is just that business. And I just want to say one thing. In all the time I've been in professional wrestling, I have never ever had a real wrestling match. Every match that I've been in, or so-called match, has been merely an exhibition that was designed to attract fans to come in to see the matches, to get their money, and the only problem with that is that the matches have been billed as they've been tried to create the effect that these matches were in effect going to be real matches, that the people were mad at each other. That has never been the case. I've wrestled in Europe, the Far East, all over the world, Australia, Japan, and all over the United States, and I've never had a real match. You have no reason, most of you out there that are seeing this documentary have no reason to take my word for it. You don't know me, and unless you're a wrestling fan, you've never seen me before. For that reason, I would like to offer some corroboration. And I'd like to introduce a friend of mine, a gentleman named Larry Simon. His experience, 25 years of wrestling. Larry, I'll let you tell your own story.
Next comes Larry Simon, aka The Great Malenko. He goes over his credentials before he explains he is not actually the Russian menace known as the Great Malenko. He is an amateur great who portrayed a Russian with a messed up eye. After explaining that he was never hurt in the ring, he makes sure that it is known he was hurt when leaving the ring by a fan stabbing him.
I'm used to being in front of the TV cameras, but in a different light. I'm used to being a performer. As Bob said, my name is Larry Simon. I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and I've been wrestling professionally, may I correct Bob, 27 years. I have had, I'd say, 4 or 5 years of amateur experience. I have, from the amateurs, became a professional at a young age of 18 years old, and I am now 47 years old, and I've been wrestling all this time. I was in the professional ranks at 18, as I just got done saying, and when I was 18, I was in the preliminary matches, and I stayed in the preliminary matches for approximately, I'd say, 7 years. I wrestled in and around the New York area. When I went out from the New York area, I went to Houston, Texas. I then took on a so-called gimmick or an image as a Russian, and my name was changed to the Great Malenko, and I have been wrestling for the last 20 years as the Great Malenko. I have been what they call on top of the ladder. On top is a vernacular we use in our business. For 20 years I have wrestled all over the country. I have been on top in Florida, the Carolinas, the Tennessee area, Nebraska, Texas, and my trademark through the years, people that have been watching wrestling, people that have followed wrestling, have known me as a person that stands in that camera each week with his eye cocked like this. And this is my shtick, this is my gimmick. I would say something in reference to this, my voice would change, I would accumulate an accent as I'm talking to you here and now. I am 230 pounds of mind and muscular coordination that is unbeatable. This is something that I am an expertise at. But as well as the light side, I would like to show you something else, or tell you something. I have never had, in all the 27 years of being a professional wrestling, what you call a real wrestling match. You can call it whatever you want. It was a planned type of match. I knew who was going to win, and I knew who was going to lose. It was all set up before I ever went out to wrestle. But one thing at one time did occur. In the match, even though I did never get hurt seriously in a professional wrestling match, coming out of the ring in Richmond, Virginia, and I have wrestled all over the world, I had a fan cut me on the side, getting angry at me and my tactics, and taking a slice of my side, which caused me to have 70 stitches. Now, I would like to one more time reiterate and say that I have never in all my 27 years ever had a real wrestling match. And to corroborate my story, I would like to introduce you to a dear friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Ron Wright, who has a great deal of experience along with me. Here he is now.
Next is Ron Wright. He looks like a sleepy Buzz Sawyer. He shares the sentiments of the Great Malenko and explains that he was never hurt in the ring and never had a real wrestling match, but was hurt by fans multiple times.
My name is Ronald Wright. I have wrestled for the past 25 years as a professional wrestler, mostly in the Tennessee area and on the eastern coast of the United States. In my 25 years, I, like Mr. Malenko, have never had a real legitimate wrestling match. My wrestling matches have all been pre-planned and worked out before ever entering the ring in any of the cities that I have ever wrestled, or more like that I've ever performed in. Myself, like Mr. Malenko, the only real fights that I have ever had in professional wrestling in 25 years has come from the spectators. At times I've been in the ring performing for the spectators, and maybe I performed a little too well, and I would get the spectators a little too riled up. One night in Greenville, Tennessee, I had one of these such occasions that I got the fans too mad with my make-believe wrestling, and I had 191 stitches put in my back. I'll turn around here where you can get a close-up view of the scar down my back. You can get a close-up view there. You can see that I have been cut from the shoulder all the way down below the belt buckle, 38 stitches in the back of my head, 18 more stitches in the left shoulder from the stab wound, all in the same night. There have been other times in different cities that I have been stabbed 2 or 3 more times on different occasions. But like I said before, in the entire years that I have wrestled, 25 years, I have never had a real legitimate wrestling match. They were always pre-planned, pre-arranged by the wrestling booker that we call him, or the promoters in every city that I have ever wrestled. And to back my story up, I would like to bring another man out here that's been well known all over the United States, and bring him on the set and introduce him. This is Ronnie Garvin.
Coming up next, we step our star power up a notch and bring a very young, rugged Ronnie Garvin, looking like the antagonist from No Country for Old Men, and going out of his way to make you believe he is a nice guy who is just a really great actor. One so good he can convince himself sometimes. And oh yeah, that he has never had a real wrestling match.
Well, thank you, Ron. Ron and I had many fights, none of them real, of course, because he's a great friend of mine. So is Professor Malenko, so is Bob Roop. Especially Professor Malenko and I, we go quite a few years. I've been in wrestling 18 years. I've known him at least 10 or 12 years. Professor Malenko and I, we had some great matches that people believe. Even at times I was almost believing him. That's how great of an actor I consider myself. So it's Professor. I respect his talent as an actor, as a performer. I'm from Montreal, and I was brought up in the streets, fighting with baseball bats, chains, and wrestling, professional wrestling to me was really something that I looked up to when I was a kid. And I wanted to become a professional wrestler. And I did. And I was kind of disappointed. In a way not, because money was good. I made good money. I've been a top wrestler for the past 10 years. And especially in part of Tennessee, around Knoxville area, I'm known as a one-man gang. People really believe in me. Well, I can fight, but in all my wrestling career, I have yet to have a real wrestling match. All my matches have been arranged. I went out in the ring and used chairs and gimmicks that wrestlers call. And I'm good at it, because I convince the people. People think I'm a maniac. Actually, I'm not. I'm a great actor. Just like a movie actor that can make you cry. Well, I can make you come out of your seat and jumping up and down. Create excitement. It's my job. That's what I get paid for. And actually, I'm a calm person. And when I make interviews, I go crazy. My eyes, my facial expression change. This is what I do. And people do believe me. And like I said, I have yet to have a real wrestling match. And I've got many friends. Well, as a matter of fact, I've got 5 good friends in wrestling that we had great battles, grudges, cage matches, chain matches, that I would bet my life that I could make anybody believe it. But actually, after it's over, we're probably drinking a beer, smoking, eating, you name it, we do it. Loving together, parties. That's the way of life in wrestling. Now I've got a good friend of mine. I've got great respect for him. He's a great performer. I love to work with him. The word work means wrestle, because actually we work together. I want to introduce you to him. His name is Bob Orton Jr.
The final man to take the microphone is quite a name. It's second-generation wrestler and father of current WWE top guy Randy Orton, Cowboy Bob Orton. He is young, blonde, and probably cuts the best promo in the whole tape. He gives a story about his father's time in the ring, and, say it with me now, he has never had a real wrestling match.
They didn't save the best for last, believe me. They saved the youngest for last. Because these are honest people and the youngest should go last. But ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you this. I started going to the wrestling matches at the age of 5 years old. And I believed everything I seen. I mean, when people got thrown out of the ring and got split open and the blood flew, hey, I believed it. And yes, I become excited. But then one night, I seen a man in the middle of a wrestling ring. And another man named Fred Blassie looked like he was ripping his eyes out of his head. And I broke down into tears, and I actually went into hysterics. I was hard to control. You know who that man was? My father, Bob Orton Sr. And that night home in the car, when I was 8 years old, I'm still crying. I'm wondering how Dad can see while he's driving down the road. Well, Dad told me, Bob, there's nothing to worry about. Everything that goes on in a wrestling ring is a fabrication. It's something that you do to make wrestling fans believe that what you're doing is real, but in actuality it's not. And yes, from that point, I grew into a teenager, and I become very interested in wrestling. And I become an amateur wrestler. And no, I was not a Bob Roop. I didn't go to the Olympics. I was not a national champion. But I was a 3-time state champion in 3 different states, and I was an All-American. And then, lo and behold, I broke into the pros. And I'll tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Since the time I started professional wrestling, I'm 29 now. I started pro wrestling when I was 21. I have never had a real wrestling match. And you can look at it as good or bad, whatever, but what I'm saying right now is that when you see professional wrestling, the winner and the loser is determined. The worst any wrestler that I know has ever been hurt in the ring, broken arm, broken leg, is an accident. And of course, we've already seen Professor Malenko, Ron Wright, out here showing the scars where an occasional hot-tempered audience may use a knife, slice a man, throw a rock at a man's head, or whatever. But what I'm going to do right now is I've told my story. I've told you the truth. We're honest people. I'm going to give us back to Bob Roop, because he is the man.
Bob Roop takes back the microphone, making sure to let everyone know this is a brave thing they are all doing, and that these are honest men taking on a huge business. The strangest claim is that they were planning to turn this into a series, as well as accusing wrestling of everything from insurance fraud, prostitution, and a slew of other things.
Ladies and gentlemen, those of you watching this, what you're seeing is historic in a sense because of the fact that nobody's ever had the courage and in a sense the dignity to come out here and say the things they've been saying. We've all been conditioned to protect the wrestling industry because it is big business. It's $1 billion business. They only report about 330 million of it a year. 3rd largest spectator sport. But it is big business, and we've been conditioned to protect it, even though it is a fraud. Well, this is just the outline. This is the first part of a mini-series that we have planned. And in later segments, we're going to talk about, the second question I was ever asked after Is Wrestling Fake was, where does the blood come from? We're going to do a whole segment on where does the blood come from. We're going to show you exactly where it comes from. We're going to demonstrate terms of the wrestling business, how the actual manipulations work. That's going to be another segment. We're going to do a segment about the money. Like I just said, $1 billion a year earned and only 330 million reported. The IRS is surprised about that, I imagine. We're going to talk about legal prostitution, great big muscular wrestlers being in effect just prostitutes. Prostitutes with muscles, we'll call that segment. We're going to talk about the monopoly of the wrestling business. It's a monopoly, and we're going to talk about the political connections that enable it to stay a monopoly. We're going to talk about the impact of homosexuality on the wrestling business. We're going to talk about drug abuse in the wrestling business, and it's prevalent, believe me. We're going to talk about the federal laws that are being broken knowingly with the cooperation of federal authorities. We're going to talk about the destructive nature of pro wrestling upon the human being over a long-term basis. We're going to talk about the fear and loathing of the promoters against any attempts to unionize. Wrestlers have no protection. Management is organized and labor isn't. The wrestlers themselves have no benefits at all. No pension plan, no health insurance, no life insurance, no retirement plan, no protection for their families, nothing. And the promoters do. That's not only illegal, it's immoral. And the last but not least, we're going to get into the personal effect, talking about wrestlers, their particular gimmicks. For you wrestling fans, this is going to be real interesting because we're going to talk about some of your favorites and your not so favorites. And we're going to tell you what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they're not going to be favorites or unfavorites any longer.
The first thing that comes to mind when seeing something like this is how much it would have changed the wrestling world had they went through with their plan. Factor in that the tape just sat there existing, and the fact it only recently resurfaced is truly surprising. The feud between the two promotions was left without a winner, as both were done with the territory soon after.
And I couldn't figure out, they did everything in that wrestling war that was horrible. It's just ridiculous what they did. But I was really surprised when I saw this that they didn't do that when they had their last television show. When they were closing down, I'm surprised they didn't put that on there and just go ahead and kill it. Just kill it. What they basically did in that wrestling war is Knoxville was dead for 5 years. It took me 5 years to build it, and we started in a little dinky building with probably 1,000 people, and we end up wrestling in a coliseum with 9,000 or 10,000 and filling it up every week. Wrestling was tremendously hot there, and they murdered it so badly. When I sold it to Jim Barnett, he could never draw money in there. He sold it to Ric Flair. He sold it to Crockett. Crockett sold it to Ric Flair and Blackjack Mulligan. No one could go in there and draw money again. We went to Pensacola. I sold it. I went to Pensacola in 1979. In 1985, I had Southeastern down there in Pensacola, was doing big business, and I changed the name to Continental, and we went back to Knoxville. First night we went back, I took everybody that had been stars in the 70s there. My brother, Jimmy, Rob, Barb Armstrong, Stomper, just a fabulous card, and sold out the Coliseum again. First night, we went in there for years, and it's like we never left.
The video is one of the most strangely historic and curious things to have been brought into our collective wrestling history, and almost gives a view into an alternate universe where it wasn't 2020 that put wrestling on blast on TV, but instead a group of outlaws who were mad at another promoter. At the end of the day, what is worth wondering is, after all these years, do Ron Fuller of Southeastern and Bob Roop of All Star Wrestling still hold a grudge?
Is the heat between you and Ron Fuller over, in your opinion? Because I interviewed him recently and he said he thinks he could forgive everyone in that video, but he's not sure about you. But I understand you're going to be at the same convention coming up this summer.
Well, I don't know what he has to forgive. I don't think about Ron much, or the fact at all. It's ancient history. I mean, I don't carry grudges. You carry a grudge, all you're doing is hurting yourself. It's over. What was done is done. I don't think about it anymore.
What would happen if Bob Roop walked into the room right now?
Man, I don't know. You know, I have forgiven all those guys except for Roop. I have never seen Roop since. I don't know, you know, I really think that a lot of that war was Roop. A lot of those guys, all of those guys, in fact, had worked for me for years and never had a problem with any of them. And Bob Roop came in February, put him in as a booker, and this crap ball starts in 4 months, 3 or 4 months later. And I believe, you know, he's the guy that instigated all of it. And you know, I don't have good feelings about him, but I don't like to carry grudges, and I don't think the good Lord wants us to not forgive people. And you know, and probably if I saw him face to face, probably it's been a long time.
Which you probably will sooner or later, because I know he's at the WrestleMania conventions this year, and you're probably going to be doing more and more of those.
Yeah, I'm going to be running. In fact, I think we're both on one in Charlotte, one coming up in Charlotte in August, and we're both for the same company.
Maybe they could have a wrestling match between you guys. Get it all out of the system for good.
Yeah.
If you have only been watching television for the last several years, you may be under the impression that the Steiner brothers are just a couple of nice old fellows who ran a Shoney's and are now watching their next generation come through the sport. However, if you have been paying attention for a few years, you have possibly heard a few stories about the real Steiner brothers.
I love them both to death, and we're super friends. But bully-wise, was your Steiner boys. The Steiner brothers, they just every time they came by you, they hit you, or they, put your hand down your neck, and they didn't realize how strong they were, so they were hurting you, But they didn't mean that. They wasn't like bullying. They were just playing, but it was always something. I mean, if I saw them coming, I'd leave the room.
The brothers had a reputation like no other, striking fear into basically everyone, but mostly the enhancement talent of the time who dreaded their name being drawn to face the team. Mick Foley had such an experience.
And I'll admit, when I walked into Center Stage Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, I was under the assumption that I was in line for some type of promotional push from the company. So imagine my surprise, even my horror, when I looked at the chalkboard that listed that evening's events and saw my name along with a partner known as Rick Fargo, not exactly a household name, set to do battle with the Steiner brothers. Rick and Scott Steiner were like animals, and I momentarily contemplated quitting the wrestling business. I could feel my heart sinking in my stomach. And this was a move I would later go on to see 4 or 5 other grown men make when they saw their name on that same chalkboard with a different wrestler, a wrestler named Vader. I'm talking about the Vader, who made grown men look at each other and go, I don't think this business is for me, Joey. And I would watch, being an observer of people, I would watch out the tiny window at Center Stage Theaters. They took that long, lonely walk across Peachtree Street, their gear slung over their shoulder in the days before rolling bags. It's a long time ago. Never to be seen or heard from again. And that's the type of decision, a career-making decision I was on the precipice of making when I heard the voice of one of my saving graces in that room. I was so lucky, fortunate to have 2 saving graces in that room on that night, the first of which belonged to Kevin Sullivan, a member of WCW's booking committee, one of the greatest minds this business has ever known. And I just heard that voice. He said, brother, what's your finish? Now, finish is wrestle speak or finishing move or finishing hold. I just seen my name on the chalkboard against the Steiners. I was under the impression there would be no offensive moves for Mrs. Foley's baby boy, let alone one so impressive it put an end to Rick or Scott Steiner. So without thinking about it, I just kind of blurted out, I drop an elbow? And he looked at me in disbelief. He said, an elbow for your finish? Should be pointed out without further explanation. An elbow drop for a finishing move sounds rather weak, benign, borderline Hogan-esque. Now, during the course of that match, true to Kevin Sullivan's words, Rick and Scott Steiner during the course of that match, true to Kevin Sullivan's words, Rick and Scott Steiner could have been a little bit nicer to me.
Foley escaped the wrath of the brothers that night, but many were not so lucky.
What had happened was that I didn't know this. He later told me, because I was like, bro, why were you being so stiff? And this is true. If you watch a match, you can see it is true. Shane Douglas is supposed to do a run-in, and for some reason he came out late, and so Rick, just kept hitting me. I actually thought he might be stiffing him, and I actually asked him as a shoot. I said, because me and Bischoff had some heat back then too, and Bischoff had also made a comment once to me and Billy Kidman. In time, I was so mad at you guys. I was thinking of having some people just throw you into a room and turn off the lights and beat the shit out of you. And I was like, God damn. When Bischoff told me that, in the back of my mind, I was now thinking all the time, fuck, this guy might ambush me one day or some shit. In the back of my mind, I just thought Eric was behind him, and I go, did Eric tell you to do that to me? He goes, no, bro. And if he did, I wouldn't have done it. He goes, we don't have no heat. So as far as I'm concerned, we didn't have any heat, because before that, me and Rick had never had words, never had nothing.
Rick had a long-running reputation of simply beating up whoever he wanted to in the ring if he felt things were not to his liking in any given match. Similar to how people view Haku today, Rick Steiner was seen through the 80s and early 90s. He was simply never to be messed with, and unlike the Tongan he was compared to, Rick would often take many liberties with his opponents, and unfortunately, far more than the beatings in the ring.
Would you consider being taped to a table and having a pencil stuck up your ass?
I call it a Thursday night, but
I call it. One time this thing goes down and fucking Robbie sticks a pencil up this fucking guy's ass, and I looked at him and I said, "Did you know that's a felony? That's sodomy." I said, "I'm walking out of here because I don't want to be in a deposition."
Now, who would this be? I know, just another wrestler, a job guy, or Mel Phillips? Who?
Fucking, it could be anybody. It could be a top guy. I've seen fucking Lex walk into Augusta TV all fucking jacked with cowboy boots, and fucking Steiner walk behind him and kick his feet together. Fucking watch Lex do a fucking back, and nobody would fight him.
Right.
I mean, nobody would fight Robbie, and Robbie was a crazy one.
Yeah. Did you ever find anybody duct taped to a bench or anything of that persuasion where the Steiners had caught them up?
I personally watched them do that to Disco. They duct taped him what's it called when your legs are back and your feet are back and they're tied?
Oh, like hog-tied.
Like hog-tied, exactly. And they were trying to shove a Sharpie up his, what. And I was just new on the scene, and I just remember reaching down as cool and calm as I could. I ended up in the A locker room like by accident, and I got my bags and just eased out the door. So I realized I was next,
Did I take it Did Disco get away unviolated, or did you not stick around to see the ending?
He didn't get violated, but it was pretty rough.
Rick Steiner's reputation was far from that of a good dude, and that would follow him into the new millennium. Still beating up guys on even indie shows once WCW had closed. He continued to be known as the guy you didn't mess with until one day he came across a young fellow in Florida. Vordell Walker is a name most wouldn't know, but to those who do, he is one of the most heralded names of the early 2000s indie scene. He had standout matches against many future stars and seemed primed to be one himself. He was part of the crop of guys keeping the indie scene alive during a time where it was struggling and a big break seemed right around the corner. All of that would change after taking a booking for a tag team match where across the ring would be Rick Steiner and Dustin Rhodes.
So many years ago, this is going back probably 12 or 13 years, like 2005, I think this was. At an indie show, this guy, who on the indie scene, his name is Vordell Walker. Vordell Walker was tagging with Dustin Rhodes, and he teamed up with Walker, and on the opposite side of the ring, it was Rick Steiner and another independent wrestler whose name escapes me. Well, Steiner had a reputation for being a bit of a bully to some people and taking liberties with people, which is not a hard leap to make when you think of those old Steiner Brothers squashes back in the day and how they just fucking brutalized some of those guys. Well, on this night, he had a bee in his bonnet, I guess, and right out of the gate, he was throwing some legit kicks at Vordell Walker. He busted his mouth open. He was kicking the shit out of this guy. Walker, though, instead of just taking it, he gave it right back to him. He threw a bunch of shoot kicks. He took him down. And Steiner was stunned because he probably figured, holy shit, this kid's fighting back. He didn't expect that. Walker stood up to him. He wasn't going to take any of his shit. And it turned into sort of a famous story. Then there was a backstage confrontation, but this guy would not stand down. So when you mention the name Vordell Walker or type it in, you get a lot of those stories about the incident with Rick Steiner, and this guy is probably not somebody that you want to be messing around with.
The confrontation had been lost media for almost 20 years, until recently, and though many tried to downplay Walker's acumen within the industry who were close to Steiner, most infamously Raven trying to say it was all exaggerated for a large portion of one of his interviews, the footage clearly shows a man finally being served his humble pie. My personal favorite part of the entire thing is at the end when Rick is seen trying to go after Walker but is too beat to do anything, and Walker just yelling at Steiner how foolish his actions were until Rick is dragged off by Dustin Rhodes.
Go back.
Though he would get a chance in to do some work for NXT, Vordell's day on the big stage hasn't come yet. Many attribute it to the old-timers of the day being put off by what he did to Steiner and bad-mouthing him, but you can never be sure. Please go check out the original video linked below, as Crusher Bones, finding this piece of wrestling history, has answered some of the most long-running questions in shoot wrestling history and contributed a great deal. However, one thing you can be sure of is that Vordell is still out there today, and he doesn't seem to have aged one bit. Perhaps his day is still on the horizon. If that doesn't come to pass, at least you now are one of those who know the legend of Vordell Walker.
True crime on YouTube has had a pretty half-and-half relationship with accuracy and has had a lot of criticism thrown its way, but a lot of people enjoy it. When a lot of people are enjoying something, it creates a demand, and with that demand comes people needing stories to feed the masses. In True Crime Rush, one story was pushed around quite a bit and led to a few misconceptions we can hopefully clear up. Juanna Barazza, a name that invokes a lot of different emotions if you are familiar with the lucha wrestling scene. Known to the world as La Mataviajites, or Little Old Lady Killer, Barazza's life is a blend of lies, crime, murder, and of course, wrestling. A lot of videos on the topic of Barazza tend to emphasize her wrestling career, but there is a little more to that topic than most bother to get into. To understand Barazza, one must first look at her origins. Born on December 27, 1957 in Hidalgo, Mexico, Barazza's early life was not an easy one. Growing up in a poverty-stricken environment, she faced challenges from a young age. Reports suggest that her mother, an alcoholic, gave her away at the age of 13 to a man who subjected her to all kinds of abuse of all manners. This traumatic experience left scars of many kinds, shaping her psyche in ways that would later manifest. Despite these early struggles, Barazza found an outlet in the world of lucha libre, Mexico's unique form of professional wrestling. Lucha libre offered her an escape from the grim realities of her life at the time. It was here that she began to craft a new identity, one that would allow her to transcend her beginnings and step into a spotlight. Barazza's entry into the world of lucha libre was not as a competitor in the ring, but by locally promoting events on street teams, hanging posters, and selling popcorn as a vendor. She organized wrestling events, collaborating with talent from the prestigious CMLL, as well as various independent wrestlers from the local circuit. Her role immersed her in the subculture of lucha libre, where she was well known to the wrestlers and fans alike. However, Barazza's ambitions stretched beyond the sidelines. She wanted to be a star. To achieve this, she fabricated a persona as a masked wrestler known as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. According to her self-spun tale, she was a ruda, a villainous wrestler in lucha libre world, who had competed in the ring until an injury forced her into retirement. The narrative was not entirely implausible in the world of lucha libre, where masks and secret identities are part of the tradition, but it was a fiction nonetheless. Now this probably goes against everything you have heard about the topic, as most videos and such emphasize that she was a pro wrestling serial killer. For years I have sought out evidence of her wrestling and doing anything in the ring, and the closest I was able to get was finding this footage of something happening on a show with a wrestler known as the Ku Klux Clown. Barazza went to great lengths to legitimize her story. She managed to go as far as to secure a feature in Super Luchas, a prominent wrestling magazine in Mexico. In issue number 61, published on May 31st, 2004, she appeared in the Los Rayos X section, photographed and credited by veteran photojournalist Don Luis Napoles Salas. This exposure lent a veneer of authenticity to her claims, allowing her to present herself as a credible figure within the wrestling community. Clad in a mask and costume of her own making, she posed as La Dama del Silencio, weaving a tale of a career cut short by misfortune. In reality, Barazza was not a trained wrestler. She was a fervent enthusiast whose obsession with lucha libre drove her to create an elaborate alter ego. Her involvement in the sport was limited to promotion and fandom, but her fabricated persona allowed her to bask in the admiration and respect she craved, even if it was only through one article. This act of deception was a precursor to the more grandiose lies she would later tell, revealing a pattern of self-aggrandizement that defined much of her life. One of the most audacious chapters in Barazza's tale of deception was her claim of having achieved glory in the World Wrestling Federation, now known as WWE. She boasted to fellow wrestlers, acquaintances, and even in the article of Super Luchas that she had been summoned to the United States for a prestigious tour during which she won WWF Women's World Championship. This assertion painted her as a trailblazer, a Mexican luchadora who had conquered the American wrestling scene, a feature that would have elevated her to legendary status in the eyes of her peers. However, this claim was, like the rest, a complete fabrication. The WWF, a global juggernaut in professional wrestling, has no record of Juanna Barazza ever stepping into its ring, let alone competing for or winning its women's championship. The story was too extravagant, too disconnected from reality to uphold under scrutiny. Recognizing the implausibility of her tale, the authors of the article would note that she actually won women's championship in the World Wrestling Association, WWA, a smaller and less prominent promotion in Puerto Rico, was a more believable substitute, though still a lie. Barazza still had her article, and with that was able to tote it from conversation to conversation, showing it off to anyone who questioned her wrestling credentials. Barazza's lies about wrestling were not mere boasts. They were a calculated effort to enhance her standing within the wrestling community. In a world where reputation and legacy are paramount, she sought to position herself as a figure of significance, someone who had transcended the local scene to achieve international acclaim. Her willingness to deceive Super Luchas and others reflects her deep-seated desire for recognition, a desire that her modest reality could not fulfill. This penchant for fabrication foreshadowed the darker deception she would employ in her criminal life, where pretense became a tool for far more sinister ends. While Barazza's wrestling persona was a work of fiction, her crimes were very much a reality. Between 1998 and 2006, Mexico City was terrorized by a series of murders targeting elderly women. The killer, dubbed La Mataviejitas by the press, operated with chilling precision. Posing as a social worker or government official, she gained the trust of her victims, entered their homes, and then strangled them with whatever was at hand: stockings, cables, or other household items. After the murders, she would rob the homes, taking valuables she would find in the process. The victims were all women over 60, often living alone and having no self-defense. The brutality of the killings, combined with the vulnerability of the targets, sparked widespread fear and outrage. The police launched an extensive investigation, but early efforts were hampered by a critical misjudgment. They assumed the killer was a man, due to the physical strength required to overpower the victims. This gender bias allowed Barazza to evade suspicion for years, as her unassuming appearance as a middle-aged woman blended seamlessly into crowds as searches persisted for a man that didn't exist. Criminologists have speculated that her targeting of elderly women, roughly the same age as her mother at the time of abandonment, could have been far more than coincidental. She actively sought out those who were in the gender and age bracket. Many videos attribute Barazza's crimes entirely to her traumatic childhood, poverty, abuse, and abandonment by her mother, casting her as a simple victim-turned-killer. In truth, while her difficult upbringing likely influenced her psychology, it's not the sole explanation of her actions. Her choice of elderly female victims may reflect resentment toward her mother, but her crimes also involved theft, opportunism, and many other aspects. reducing her motivations to just her past overlooks the complexity of her behavior. Some videos depict Barazza's arrest and trial as a cinematic high-stake event, suggesting she was a cunning mastermind who evaded capture through cleverness. In truth, her capture resulted more from investigative errors, like assuming the killer was male rather than her own brilliance. Her trial was significant, but not as theatrical as portrayed.
Juanna Barazza has been sentenced to 759 years in jail for killing 16 elderly women. Authorities say the woman, dubbed the Little Old Lady Killer, terrorized Mexico City's senior citizens.
She was convicted of 16 murders and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Her ability to operate undetected for so long was either a testament to her cunning abilities or the societal blind spots she exploited. Elderly women, often overlooked and underprotected, were easy prey, and Barazza's persona as a caring official disarmed them until it was too late. The reign of La Mataviejitas came to an abrupt end on January 25, 2006. Barazza was caught fleeing the scene of her latest crime, the murder of an 89-year-old Ana Marie de los Reyes Alfaro. A tenant in the building witnessed her departure and alerted the police, who apprehended her on the spot. The arrest was a breakthrough in a case that had baffled authorities for years. Fingerprints and other forensic evidence quickly linked her to multiple murders, dismantling the myth of the male killer and exposing Barazza as the true culprit. During her trial, Barazza admitted to killing one woman, claiming it was an act of rage rather than part of a broader pattern. She denied responsibility for other murders, insisting she was being framed. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, witness testimony, and stolen items recovered from her possession painted a damning picture. In 2008, she was sentenced to 759 years in prison, the longest sentence ever imposed on an individual in Mexican history. Juanna Barazza's crimes left a lasting imprint on Mexican society. Her case exposed the plight of the elderly, prompting calls for better social services and protection. It also forced a reckoning with gender stereotypes in law enforcement, as the initial focus on the male suspect delayed her capture. When people think of Juanna Barazza now on YouTube, they tend to describe her as a pro wrestling serial killer.
Juanna Barazza, known as La Mataviejitas, the Little Old Lady Killer, was a serial killer who terrorized Mexico City from 1998 to 2006, a former professional wrestler.
She wrestled as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence.
Female professional wrestler by the name of the Lady of Silence.
There's examples of strong women who smashed the glass ceiling with a bloodied hatchet. That's the kind of case we're bringing you today, the story of Juanna Barazza, a Mexican wrestler turned murderer, who targeted dozens of helpless elderly ladies in a twisted campaign of revenge. Do you think she's one of these lucha libre, or whatever it's called?
Barazza was definitely a killer, but as far as pro wrestling goes, Barazza was just an overzealous merc who was able to get in some claims to a magazine in the days long before things were vetted thoroughly. She wanted to be known as a wrestler, and if she could only get through to people who would believe it and repeat it, never mind if it's not true. It's quite the story for an audience willing to believe it. That's probably why she made it up in the first place.
If you've watched AEW wrestling any time from 2019 till the present, no doubt you've seen the Butcher and the Blade. But did you know that the Butcher had a second career? Early on, while training to become a professional wrestler, Andy Williams suffered a knee injury. During that time, he learned how to play the guitar and formed the band Every Time I Die, along lead guitarist Jordan Buckley and drummer Michael Novak. Every Time I Die emerged in the early 2000s with an uncompromising mix of hardcore punk and southern rock-tinged alternative metal. The group built a loyal following, yet remained largely underground before inking a deal with Epitaph ahead of the releasing their acclaimed fifth long player, 2009's New Junk Aesthetic. Andy has played on every album the band has ever released and hasn't really missed a live show since they formed in 1998. Due to getting into music so young and being self-taught, his issues with learning to read music had to be solved alone, and the Butcher found a solution.
I'm not a numbers guy. So like that was one of my big things when I was in school. One of my biggest learning disabilities was just I can't remember numbers to save my life. You can put them there. I have to read it 100 times for me to even get it, you know? And once I kind of realized that that's really what real life is like, or like you have to go work in a place where like you have to pay attention to all this stuff. And my brain just doesn't work that way. So like once I could funnel it into music and kind of like get that ball rolling. And then once I realized like, oh man, I kind of know what a tune is. I can kind of like put this together. And then once I found like-minded dudes, then it got really easy. You know what I mean?
Did you find like other like coping mechanisms to kind of help with those things? I think the things that you did struggle to learn, you could find little ways around it that helped you figure it out?
100%. Like I have to describe, I have to like explain stuff to my fiance sometimes when it like the way my brain works, and especially with like music, like I don't know how to read music. So like I just picked up a guitar and it just made sense. So like to me, it was more like Tetris than it was anything. I would just make these shapes up in my head and then I would just play these shapes. So like if I wrote out music to you, it would only make sense to me and the dudes I was in the band with.
They learned your language.
They had to. So like a lot of it is like X's and O's, or I'll use like squares for certain things and triangles for certain things, or I'll describe like a feeling or something like that. So like if I'm going to write something that's kind of sad, I'm going to use like a delay pedal on it, or like there's like weird, or I'm going to do like high notes. And like it really turned into like more of like a video game to me than it did like
that's fascinating.
Making music. So like a lot of things, wrestling to me is like it's like writing a song. So like once I kind of like understood how to write that song, it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like there's an intro, there's an outro, there's a chorus, there's you know, and it really does work like that. You know what I mean? Like it, you know, you need bridges and you need like stuff like that. So like wrestling still to this day is still kind of shapes and like weird colors and stuff like that. Like I'll see colors for certain things, which is like really weird.
Wow. That's amazing.
I heard that you are a wrestler.
Yeah, I have.
You gotta teach me how to wrestle.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have tights? You can't wrestle if you don't wear underwear.
Well, then I'm out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've been telling people on this channel to subscribe, and they won't.
Yes.
What can we do about that? Can you help me out? Maybe if you tell them to subscribe, they'll do it.
Threaten them. I'll threaten them
If
for
you
you.
do that, that'd be great.
Yeah. You don't have to do it till you're cursed. When you wrestle, what's your name when you wrestle? Or do you just go by Andy?
I just go by Andy Williams.
Wow.
That's my name all across the board.
So they're like, hey, everybody, coming down the aisle is Dean the Destroyer and Andy. Doesn't really have much of a ring to it, does it,
No, it really doesn't.
We gotta come up with a better name for
I gotta
you.
work on that.
Now, the band was really popular in the New York area, so when Andy would first go out and wrestle, they would lean on that fame, you know, book him as Andy Williams from Every Time I Die, and he would kind of dress the same way that he would dress on stage, you know. He would very much be Andy Williams from the band. Here he is wrestling. It was like a novelty act.
And that was the thing, man. When I first started wrestling, like, it was getting really boring because, like, promoters would hit me up and they'd be like, yeah, I got this great idea. I have the best idea for you. We're going to have our number one heel say, oh, you want to be a wrestler? You're a music guy? And he's going to pull out a guitar. And he's going to make fun of you with the guitar. And then you're going to choke slam him. You cool with that? And it's like, I did that literally last weekend, dude.
But as they started to get more serious and, he was teaming up with the Blade, Jesse, and they formed this tag team. And Jesse told him, hey, if you really want to be taken serious as a wrestler, you're going to have to start dressing like a wrestler. You're going to have to fit in more and kind of drop this whole thing where you're Andy from, Every Time I Die. And that's when they got really serious. And Andy, inspired by, his love of movie tough guys, he came up with this whole concept of the Butcher and the Blade.
And Jesse would just one day just goes, you want to be treated like a pro wrestler, look like a pro wrestler. And I was like, okay. And I think I watched Running Man, and his name was the Butcher of Bakersfield. So I started calling myself the Butcher of Buffalo, Andy Williams, and then made a weird long jacket, started wearing tights.
In 2022, the band would break up.
But to have Every Time I Die come to an end, how has that been for you?
I'm still having problems. I'm still having problems with it. It's, my life was, it's the best way to say it is it's alphabet soup, right? It's not full sentence. You have to look for things, you know what I mean? So my life was really just a bunch of things just thrown at the wall. That's the type of things that you're when you're thrown in a van at 17, no one's really teaching you life stuff. They're just kind of you just stay in a van. And then when problems occur, you just get back in the van, and now it's kind of you kind of have to grow up really fast, and you realize oh man, I thought I was grown up, and then all these things just kind of hit you, and you're oh man, that's okay. This is life. This is how life is without a van and a trailer. You literally had people cater to you in a band for years. And now it's I had a tour manager, and I had a manager, and I had, you know what I mean?
This series of events would lead to Andy rededicating himself to wrestling and putting on some of his best matches. With his gimmick now figured out, some people in the wrestling world didn't even know he was in a band.
So I think someone tipped off Miro that I had played in a band, and then he came up and he was like, someone told me you play in a band. And I was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, I want to know everything about it. There's people that don't know I play in a band.
In 2023, the Butcher would announce old members of the band had come together to form another project.
We have the ability to have a new favorite band. We have the ability to follow this band and feel everything again.
And
LA Knight may be considered a can't-miss prospect now and an obvious choice to have on your pro wrestling company's roster, but this wasn't always the case. For many years, fans may have found him on the NWA or TNA's wrestling programs and wondering how the WWE wasn't using him. And as it turns out, he has already been there and the WWE has passed on him. Well, more specifically, one person had passed on him. Knight had made some waves on the independent circuit at the time and was one of the many guys who felt that the ever-expanding WWE developmental machine around this era was a good choice for him to get his chance in wrestling. He could have been correct in almost any other era, but in a surprising turn of events given the current state of the wrestling world, the WWE would pass on LA Knight before he was even really given a chance. WWE has been known to have interesting developmental programs with less than stellar reputations, but this particular time frame was notorious for having a specific trainer who was accused of some pretty poor and in some cases abusive treatment of his students.
It's been said it takes 10,000 hours to master your craft. And I've been doing this for almost 28 years. And while I'm still trying to master my craft, some say I'm the best at what I do.
Bill DeMott was never really a guy who many ever saw as someone who would go on to be the guy who taught others how to be superstars. But this is exactly the job he landed. DeMott was heading up to the developmental brand for many years, and saw many come through his doors, but also saw many leave through those same doors.
How was Bill as a trainer? Do you feel that he took advantage of people?
I think that he certainly took advantage of his position of power.
People would walk in like the room and we'd wait to see if Bill was on the floor because we were like, what kind of mood is Bill gonna be in? Either you're gonna walk in and Bill's gonna be like, hey, how you doing, champ? Like, fuck yeah. Or it's gonna be this.
Yeah, he's my brother.
And like it ruins your day. It fucks your whole day because then you're like, fuck, I gotta do a Bill all day.
But he does it knowing it's gonna fuck your day.
But this is the thing. Like, sure, like, so he had to play his gimmick, like the hard ass fucking. I had this
the tough enough cameras were rolling
in his head. Hard, like, and like it just changed. Like earlier in the day, we're in the office, and he's like, "Hey, come in the office. Let's talk. Let's catch up. See how things are going here." And I'd go out of it like one of two ways. A, like, hell yeah, Bill likes me. This is gonna be a good day. This is gonna be a good week. Or he'd speak in these weird riddles that you leave being more confused. He's like, today's Tuesday, but we need you on a Friday. But it's Thursday. And you leave and you'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Is it true that if you weren't going out drinking with him, he wouldn't push you to the office? I've heard rumors of that. I don't know how true it is.
Right. I would say it was certainly the popular theory.
Right.
At that time.
He had his boys then?
Yeah. I mean, there were people that hung out with him in their spare time, and those were coincidentally the people that kept getting sent up. If it was my opinion, I would say they weren't necessarily the right people to go. But really, was it my opinion? No, of course not. Bill was the guy in charge. Is it right? Is it wrong? I mean, for me, I do believe that hard work should be rewarded, and I think the best guys should go up. And I think if you send the best guys up, it's going to look better on you in the end. I mean, right?
Yeah.
But I do understand wanting to look out for your friends. Wrestling has always very much been that.
Stories of demonstrament of his students has now become notorious in its allegedly abusive and degrading nature. One of the more notorious incidents involved nudity and jelly donut during the training session.
Jelly donut story is the best story in the whole world. And it was used the wrong way and the wrong caption was put to it, and I tormented people and made them train naked and use jelly donuts. It's the most absurd thing in the world. But someone filmed it and put a caption to it, and they went, what do we do with that? Oh, don't eat jelly donut. Don't make a deal. Right? That was the deal. They made a deal. They didn't want to train. They made a deal. What's the deal? I'll give somebody a squisher bare ass with a jelly donut in their mouth. I look around at 40 people, and I went, deal. Guy gets naked. Other guy sits in a corner with a jelly donut in his mouth. He runs across the ring, hits the Rikishi ass bump, squishes it all over the face. Funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Everybody's ripped running. Okay, we're done. Everybody can go home. No training, no nothing. That was the deal. 6 years later, that picture comes out on the internet. Bill DeMott makes students train naked. The picture was blurry, it wasn't defined, it wasn't anything. All you could see was me in the background going.
Men like Kenny Omega, Sami Callihan, and others came and went through this developmental system, but given his success and the success of LA Knight now, it raises a few questions. One of those questions being if it's more well known at this point for who leaves the system than graduates the system. Now, why would this matter to the long-term story of LA Knight, and what does it have to do with why he was let go from WWE in 2013? Apparently, everything. LA Knight has remained tight-lipped about his reason for being let go in recent interviews and conversations about his previous stint in the company, but if you go back enough, you'll be able to find him being more than open about the topic.
Everybody talks about the last time you were down in NXT, the Bill DeMott
situations and things like that, and obviously no love lost, I'm sure, after what happened to him.
Well, I mean, look, I think. I mean, obviously, I guess justice was served in some way with his exit there. A lot of stuff worked out. I ended up getting signed to WWE in 2013. I did the show with The Rock, The Hero, around the same time.
Yeah.
And then all this stuff just started happening. Of course, the WWE thing didn't work out as well as I'd hoped.
What would you say was the biggest reason for that?
If I'm honest,
I say be 100% honest.
Well, at the core of it, it's me.
Okay.
I'm so not good at hiding my feelings, and Bill DeMott and I did not get along.
Get out of town.
What a surprise, everybody.
Get the F out of town.
This just in. Bill DeMott didn't get along with somebody. Now, I will say I didn't get it to the degree of what I hear some of the guys got at FCW, where they were getting some of the physical stuff, because there were cameras and microphones and everything at the PC. So, like, eyes were on you at all times. So it was different ways that he'd mess with you. I mean, it was very strange, because he'd come in some days and like we'd be cool. Another day I'd come in and be like, "Good morning, Bill." He'd look at my hand and just walk away and not shake my hand. It was you know, here's the head coach. Like, you go to say hello. There's a big etiquette thing with wrestling. I don't know if you guys know out there, but every day you come in, you shake everybody's hand, you introduce yourself, you say hello, whatever. You go up to say hello to the head coach, who you figure is supposed to be your example, right? He looks at your hand and walks away. It's like, you're the head coach. Like, you're supposed to be an example. And he'd always say, "Oh, I'm working, but."
What do you mean I'm working?
Yeah,
like he's working you?
Yes,
like,
I don't know.
That?
I don't know. It's bullshit.
Like, I'm working, I'm doing my job, I don't have time to shake it. No. Okay, that you're being a dick, but I can see your point. I'm working.
No,
he means he's working.
He means he's working the boys.
To what end?
I don't know. And it was just a lot of BS. Tells other people he hates you, this stuff, but then tells you that he's working. And then I'd hear that, like, you know, he said he hated me to a couple people, and that's fine. We don't have to be best friends, but. I ended up going in and talking to him, because I was like, well, I'm not just going to ignore that. And I was like, hey, so we need to talk. And he's like, what's the problem? I said, well, I'm hearing that you're telling people you hate me. That's fine. I said, we don't have to be best friends or anything. But if that's going to impede my progress, I shouldn't be here. I should move on.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, don't get caught up in all this high school BS. I'm just working when I'm saying that. And I'm like, what do you mean? We're not, like, in a situation where that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's fine, and I could have chosen to react to that a certain way, but man, I have a habit of just being very straightforward. Like, I remember exactly when that happened. We were just setting up the ring for a show at NXT, and it's like, I think he'd asked somebody, where are we setting up Gorilla, and I'd remember from the last time, I was like, oh, we set it up here actually last time.
Yeah.
And then I continued on to do whatever, and he just turned around and he's like, I effing hate that guy. And it's like, okay, cool, but why am I here if that's the case? Because at every point, I can remember specifically, Michael Cole said something to him about, hey, I want this guy to do this, whatever. Whoa, watch out. And Bill just turns, I'm standing right there, and Bill goes, yeah, well, he doesn't take direction very well. And I'm just looking at Bill like, what did I do to you?
Yeah.
And so the problem is, a lot of guys can take that and keep it inside. I can't. And so at the end of the day, that falls on me. No matter what he did, no matter what he said, no matter how he reacted to me, I had a choice to take it one way or the other. The only crazy thing is that somehow that story got blown up, that I stormed in the office, slammed the door, and was looking for a fight. Which is complete insanity. There's cameras in the damn place. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not that type of guy to come in all guns ablaze, and now I came in and I was very assertive. The thing that shocked me was there were only 2 people in that office. There were only 2 people that knew that either of us were even there talking about this. So if that's the story that got around, who put the story out? And I don't want to point fingers, but then that eventually gets to Hunter, who then repeats the story back to me the day before I was fired, and tells me that I have to have respect for the coaches. And I did, because I got along with all of the coaches except him. And he's the guy who writes the reports and says, oh, this guy, no, he's not ready, blah, 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 whatever.
In wrestling, the tiniest thing can be used as a reason as to why you are not going to be used or pushed. This often leads to the people who are in charge being able to use that power to push out people they don't like while helping out those whom they are friends with. This seems to be the case with LA Knight's original run with the company. He just wasn't one of Bill DeMott's boys. Whether or not LA Knight would have reached the levels he is at today back in 2013 had he stayed with the company is impossible to say. But when you look at the guys who left under that Bill DeMott regimen, it's hard to think that WWE didn't miss out on some really great talent due to whatever issues DeMott would have with them. In a sport where nepotism determines every aspect of who becomes the next big thing or the next one to be future endeavored, it's easy to forget it's often one in leadership roles who are the problem. It's easy to forget sometimes a lot of men have had their past sabotaged by something as small as a handshake or just not going to drink with someone whether they drink or not. It's easy to not even ask why whether a guy hangs up their boots or just assume that they didn't have what it takes, but sometimes someone is able to push back against what is holding them down and against all odds make it to places the ones who held them down could never dream of seeing.
And he tweeted back to me recently after hearing me on Xbox podcast and said, I'm sorry if anybody feels that I hated them. It's BS. I completely ignored that tweet up to right now. Exclusive. But nah, I mean, I wanted to just be like, you know what, go after yourself, Bill. But I mean, as far as like something that I think about on a daily basis, no, I don't care. I mean, move on with your life. I moved on with mine. I'm loving life, making money doing what I love to do, making good money doing it, and I'm living comfortably. I drive a Corvette, live in LA, baby. Hell yeah.
Throughout wrestling channels on any platform, including this one, it is easy to find heaps of videos going out of their way to tell you how awful some people involved in the wrestling industry are to each other. Today, we will be going in the other direction. Today, we are going to talk about Vicky Lyons.
One of the best wrestling stories I've ever heard. I mean, maybe this isn't a good idea. Somebody's getting a little emotional here. And I went to Headline News thinking maybe they had something. Instead, they had Forensic Files on. Mm-hmm. And immediately I was drawn into this story about a 4-year-old girl who'd been brought into work because her mother could not find a babysitter. The boss insisted that she, the child play in the parking lot.
The driver of the vehicle, in a rush, backed out over Vicky in the unpaved, bumpy parking lot.
And I went behind this truck. I was just playing in the sand.
The mother protested, and yet when she came out like a minute later, here's her 4-year-old daughter laying down. Strange marks on her face, which the mother of the presence might take photos of in the hospital. Every Forensic Files I've ever seen deals with a deceased subject, and yet this subject struggled mightily, but did not die, and was even interviewed later on in the show, and she had extreme difficulty talking. She talked out of one side of her mouth. One of her eyes looked like it was greatly damaged at best, and yet she was this really brave young woman. And I was really touched by how hard she'd struggled. And then the show ends with the update that the mother is now going to studying forensic science, because she had helped. They'd been able to determine that the marks on her face were tire marks, and she'd been run over. It was an extraordinary story, but where it takes a really strange turn, and I know that people are watching that, this doesn't sound like such a great story, and why are you telling us about Forensic Files? The last thing they put up is that Vicky Lyons died in 2011. Unlike most things, we go, oh, that's a shame. What's on now? I want to find out more about this person. So I put in Vicky Lyons, and up pops photos, and it's clearly that young lady, and a wrestling video. It says Vicky Lyons versus Daffney. And I thought, well, that's clearly somebody else. She's not a wrestler,
Yeah.
And then when I look up cause of death or obituary, it said Vicky Lyons, and told the story. It said for the last 6 years had trained to be a wrestler with High Spots Wrestling.
Vicky was a huge wrestling fan through her life, and even though most would never think it possible for her, she wanted to be a pro wrestler. Vicky had spent a lot of her life not enjoying being around people because of her condition.
I don't always get out that much because I don't like how people make me feel.
But she began to see a way out of that mindset through pro wrestling and started to make friends as well as train to one day hopefully get into the ring in front of a crowd.
And it was just me and this trainee named Vicky, who passed away a few years ago.
She passed away.
She passed away. Now, the thing about Vicky is she was hit by a 18-wheeler, tractor trailer, whatever it was. Oh, she was 4 years old.
Oh,
so
that's how she died.
No. She was 4 years old and she survived. She pulled through. She was severely handicapped. Couldn't walk, completely straight, had kind of a lisp and, but she still got there and trained and bumped and everything. And for at least 6 months, it was just me and Vicky the whole time. And we're going back and forth. And if I took a hip toss from her and then got up kind of slow, she would call me a pussy and tell me to get up.
Yeah.
I was like, well, all right, well, if I can't say anything to you.
Right, of course.
You win. So.
Were you close, Daphne? Or you like? I mean, obviously you're sad that she passed.
Yeah.
That was like your person, though, right?
Yeah, and for a month at a time, just me and Vicky all the time, and I would take her home after each training session. So we were actually pretty close.
How did she pass?
She passed in her sleep. With her health issue complications, she, if I remember correctly, it was a brain aneurysm that took her when she went to sleep.
So it all caught up with her?
It all caught up with her.
Did she want to be like a big star? Or did
Yeah.
she just wanted to just hang out and do wrestling?
No, she wanted to wrestle all the time. She wanted to be in front of people, and she trained for about 6 years and only got 3 matches, all with. Man, she was the lioness of the ring, Vicky Lyons.
Okay. That's
Yeah, and I think all 3 of her matches were against Daffney.
So I go back to the video, and what was remarkable is that as soon as they put it on, it was like, she looked like she'd worked really hard. It was a small gym, but they had a little commentary, and they said, Vicky Lyons overcome a lot of personal adversity. I go, it's the same person.
Wow.
It's the same person, and she clearly had a lot of trouble, and Daffney was clearly, helping her, and balance was really an issue, and the finish would be, as that people like to say now, like technically maybe it was a botch. The reason it was a botch is because she didn't know she was going over. And I did a little more research, and it said, somebody said, yeah, she trained for 6 years. I think she only had 3 or 4 matches, and they were all with Daffney. And Daffney was one of those people who would fall under the label of someone who was a good friend who I'd fallen out of touch with. I went on Vicky Lyons' Twitter, and a lot of her messages were to Daffney. I saw, Daffney still followed me on Twitter. I said, could you maybe tell me a little bit more about Vicky Lyons? She seemed to be a friend of yours. And she got back to me and said, she was my best friend.
Wow.
I've got her ashes, they're still with her. And I said, do you want to, like you said, no one talks anymore. Like, hey, do you want to talk on the phone? And we had the nicest talk. And it was such a empowering talk. You're reestablishing a friendship that you take for granted in this business. We take our friendships for granted in the wrestling business quite a bit. I said, yeah, I heard that she only had 3 or 4 matches, and Daphne said, you won. Like, that was it. That was it. 1 match in 6 years. And she said she used to go over, hang out. She loved her energy. And Daphne said, hey, man, you want to go to the mall? And the girl got confused, but also touched. She was like, what do you mean? She said, we're going to go to the mall. And she looked at Daphne and said, you don't mind being seen with me, because she'd grown up where people were embarrassed to be around her.
I don't always get out that much because I don't like how people make me feel.
The little girl was supposed to be dead, and then she wasn't supposed to talk, she wasn't supposed to walk. I don't think anyone would have thought she would, struggle so mightily to achieve a goal like that. It also made me realize, geez, Daffney was so good. She had that commitment to character, and she went a direction that no one else did, and came along a little too early. I think at that time, the idea was, you can't be a WWE diva and look like that. I thought she was really a groundbreaker. Loved watching her get into that character, and thinking back, I was like, when I was in TNA, I was like, I definitely want Daffney to be part of what I'm doing, and she was a really valuable part of it. So thank you, Daffney.
Even though Vicky Lyons was dealt a very bad hand, she made the most of it in her life, and you can only find glowing reviews of her character online. She was kind to those in her wrestling classes and anyone else she met because she was grateful they would be nice enough to meet her. Through her friendship with Daffney, she was able to come out of her shell and build enough self-confidence to be more outgoing in her later years, as well as get her dream of participating in a wrestling match. She was happy to go into the match and lose, but Daffney holding her hand during the roll-up and not kicking out so she could be surprised was just another reason why Daffney was so beloved in wrestling. She really cared about those around her and making things special for them. Both Daffney and Vicky are gone now, and as easy as it would be to let their memory fade or dwell on the circumstances of their passing, I think it is far more important to focus on how they lived their lives and treated those around them. More importantly, I think their story deserves more people being aware of it and how great these two people were. As divisive and unpleasant as wrestling can be at times, I think we need to put more emphasis on its ability to bring people together and make dreams come true.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the great Antonio. Ma pourquoi donc tu as brisé ma corps? Et ma pourquoi donc n'ayez un tel bonheur?
One of the first videos that picked up traction on this channel was the original Wrestling Gets Real video. The centerpiece for that was an encounter between Antonio Inoki and a bearded man clad in chains, bright yellow pants, and a rope around his waist, named The Great Antonio. The comments of the video were inevitably filled with people asking who this guy was and why he was anywhere near a ring with Antonio Inoki. The world of wrestling was a very different one at that time, and the Great Antonio was a perfect example of why it was so different. Today, we will tell the story of the man who tried to test the tiger in front of the world. Before we begin, we should probably let people in on the secret that this man did not come out of nowhere in the professional or pop culture sense to just arrive in the ring with an Oki, and was actually one of the more interesting characters or personalities you would bump into during this era of television. However, he did come out of nowhere as far as his origin. It is assumed he migrated in his youth to North America from Yugoslavia and began his new life. Given the war-torn environment and extremely poor conditions, it was understandable that he was never one to talk about the trials of his youth. He set foot on the mean streets of Nova Scotia off of the boat, and immediately was on a path to becoming a local celebrity, between doing odd work for money, as he had been working with picks and shovels by the age of 6, allegedly. One thing that did stick with him from his youth was the ability to use cables in conjunction with his strength to perform feats for crowds of people. It is said that by the age of 11 or 12, he was able to wrap cables around trees and yank them from the ground. This was something that would propel him into the public eye by having not one, but 2 of his feats of strength done with these cables recorded by the Guinness Book of World Records. The 6'4", 465 pound, 211 kilogram man was able to sit down at tables and eat 25 chickens or a dozen steaks. The first was the case of Antonio pulling a train that weighed 433 tons, a distance of around 20 meters. And the other was for pulling 4 busloads of passengers down the street for a TV spot. Quickly, the legend of Antonio grew no matter where he would go due to his bizarre looks and mannerisms. In being hungry for the spotlight and fame, Antonio would cultivate a wild man persona that would stay with him and, for the most part, do right by him in his early years. The strongman was getting noticed by television, news, and, as you all know by now, wrestling promoters. During this time, wrestling was known for taking someone whom the public was aware of and saw as legitimate to bring in and put with their guys to keep the wrestling is a legitimate contest illusion going strong. And Antonio was next in line to be brought into the fold. With Antonio's growing legend, it was quickly noticed by promoters all over the world that there was something to be gained by having him involved in helping their stars to look tougher by facing him in the ring for the crowds. Originally, he completed under the name Narcissus, but luckily for Lex Luger's 1993 run in the WWF, he quickly changed his ring name to the Great Antonio, which would be the name he would stick with for the remainder of his days.
Now, I want to fight Muhammad Ali for $100 million, anytime, anywhere. Hey, come on! I want to break him to bits. I want to make hamburger with Muhammad Ali.
Though he had had a few matches around different territories, the first promoter to take note of the Great Antonio and really capitalize on him would be Stampede Wrestling's Stu Hart. Bret Hart's father bringing in the big man led to Bret becoming a huge fan of the strongman, watching him win 2v1 handicap matches and over-the-top rope battle royales on a regular basis. Bret was such a fan of the Great Antonio that his brother once had hurt him while playing, and to prevent Bret from telling on him, he promised Bret an autographed photo of the Great Antonio for his collection. Bret didn't tattle on his brother, and sure enough, his brother kept his word and Bret was given what he would call his most prized photo in the collection at the time. During this time in Stampede, he would even get to face the biggest star of the promotion in many's eyes, Terrible Ted, the Wrestling Bear. Due to both of them not being comfortable putting the other over, the man and the bear had pull-apart draws. Seriously. During this time with Stampede, the Great Antonio is credited with a riot after winning Stampede's North American Heavyweight Championship. and no matter where he went, the great Antonio was making everyone who saw him remember him. After his Stampede run, it should come as no shock that Japan came calling. At that time, the biggest star going was Rikidozan, and if you were unaware, he was as big of a star as it gets. He was a Korean wrestler who was world-renowned, and it could be argued he was the biggest star in all of wrestling at the time. Rikidozan would engage in some shoot wrestling, but for the most part, as was with all of them, they preferred to work with one another. Dozan brought in the great Antonio for a run where he defended the NWA International Championship against him in 1961. The showing wasn't anything that would set a crowd on fire today, but at the time the match overperformed and Antonio was becoming quite the property in the wrestling world. A good way for American fans to see it would have been comparable to John Tenter's Earthquake run in the WWF. Though he didn't beat Hogan, he was in a very solid spot just from being in the ring with him. Antonio would, for the most part, just do his own thing for the next decade or so, as he was entering his middle age and would mostly appear on TV shows and various stage events. Around 1977, a new upstart promotion you may not have heard of, called New Japan, had kicked off and began running shows. Even more interesting, they had requested the great Antonio for a tour. At this point, our guy is in his 50s and far from his best days. The booking has been criticised for years by bookers, as there has never really seemed like a reason to make the booking other than to try and further cement that Inoki was Rikidozan's successor. But Antonio was hardly going to push this to anyone other than very few who were holding out memories of the bout he had with Rikidozan. At this point, 16 years prior. More questions of the booking are brought up when you realise they had the great Antonio defeat up to 5 opponents at a time in over 10 handicap matches on the tour, and even the disqualification victory over Antonio Inoki that took place on this tour in the build-up to their infamous bout. The next part of the video is the part that all of you are the most familiar with, the bout with Antonio Inoki. The great Antonio is by most people only known through this piece of footage. During the match, he is committing a few ring sins, but the one that gets him in trouble is the stiff shots to the back of Inoki's neck. Feeling disrespected and unprotected, Inoki launched into a violent flurry that would see our guy banished from consciousness and inevitably wrestling. The great Antonio is not recorded to wrestle another match after this match took place, and most would not question why. The beating is pretty thorough, and the man was 50 at the time. Wrestling for most at this point, not just Antonio, wouldn't be an option. Going from being the strong man renowned for his feats of strength and fearsome looks, to being reduced to a heap that day in Japan was something that Antonio never saw coming, and was likely a source of hurt for the big man. Most would end the video there, but in a way, this is the part where things become much more real in the world of the great Antonio. For the remainder of the 1970s and into the 2000s, the great Antonio remained a fixture of the Montreal scene. He was on variety shows regularly and making trips to events, still showing off his feats of strength into his 60s and 70s. In the 80s, he even began landing film roles. During this time, he began producing his own flyers and pamphlets to hand out to people that showed pictures of his feats of strength in pictures from papers he would find in bins, and he would glue the letters of headlines on them to write out messages in the style of a television ransom note or a zine from the local music community. Many of them survive to this day and can be viewed online, and he made them in his free time between these shows he would do. Antonio had a lot of free time, because if you hadn't picked up on by the comment of finding pictures of his feet in bins, Antonio had become a strange figure at this time. Through all of his years, Antonio had claimed to be an alien. Yes, Antonio told people he was an extraterrestrial being. Another surprise to many was that he was married for a long time, and by many accounts, the separation from his wife was what would set him on the path he went. Antonio, though often ridiculed or mocked, also was beloved by the Montreal people. Antonio had stopped bathing and let his hair grow into long locks of mat, and would reinforce these mats with duct tape and metal rings. This allowed him to challenge local children and people to tug-of-wars with his head, to show off a lesser version of his train-pulling feats in his youth. As odd as it seems, the man who most people would look at and see nothing but a Goliath of a homeless man was a beloved member of the community who lived in an apartment even though he spent most of his days sitting on benches making tug-of-war challenges to locals, passing out his homemade pamphlets, or even challenging people to golf, which he also played with his long matted and duct tape hair. Antonio was never able to be directly reached in his later years. You would have to contact a local Dunkin' Donuts, and he would come by and collect messages once a day or so. During this time after wrestling and going place to place, his love for singing became more well known as he would sing in the streets or on variety shows with a surprising voice given his appearance. There are two pieces of footage that encapsulate the end of the great Antonio story. The first, a candid camera type show he did where he would block people inside of a phone booth. The thing that was most surprising was how all of the people were frustrated so much less when they knew it was him, and even laughed at the idea of Mr. Antonio blocking them in. As weird as he looked and odd as he acted, the people seemed to have a genuine love for the quirky giant. This is one view of the life of the quirky giant that people have a laugh with and move on with their day. The second, a man sitting alone, his life in a plastic bag, and waiting for someone to recognise him and ask for a game of tug-of-war or a pamphlet from his bag. At the end, Antonio spent most of his time just wanting to share stories with those who wanted to hear them. In 2003, he didn't have any more stories to tell. After picking up a lottery ticket and sitting at the same bench he'd always sat on, he passed away from a heart attack. Antonio had heart issues untreated for years, and never shared it with anyone. It took 9 men to get the great Antonio from his bench, and there is a commemorative plaque there now with dedication to his memory. The great Antonio was originally to be cremated as he did not have enough to have a proper funeral, but within a short time of his death becoming known, a flooding of support came in, and it was said that people who were mocking him just a week before were at his funeral and finally were paying due respect to someone who had spent most of his life trying to make the people of his adopted home of Montreal smile with his singing or his antics. To many, he was a big, smelly giant deserving of nothing but ridicule, but to others, he was a big, smelly giant that made the world a little bit more colourful and interesting place.
É uma porta que tama para toujours.